"You there? The palace guy. Let's see what those fancy boots can do." The laughter came fast, loud, and full of arrogance. Ethan Granger didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just stood at the edge of the range, sipping lukewarm coffee from a weathered thermos, wearing an old field jacket with no rank, no patches, just silence. To the young guns around him, he looked like a leftover from another era. But what they didn't know was that he once ended danger with a single pull of the trigger. This wasn't just another Saturday at the shooting range. It was the day silence fired back. And what happened next? It shut down every voice in the crowd with one shot. But before we take you to that jaw-dropping moment, do us one small favor. Smash that like button if you've ever been underestimated. Drop a comment telling us your city. We love connecting with real people. And most importantly, subscribe to Guard Royals to help us hit our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support gives us the power to keep telling stories that deserve to be told. Trust us, you'll want to stay to the last second of this one. Ethan didn't flinch when the jokes started. He simply stood at the edge of the range, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, his eyes tracking each shooter like a man cataloging more than just technique. It wasn't pride, it wasn't fear, it was precision. The kind forged far from home, in places where a missed shot cost more than points. Across the field, Lucas Blake, the loudest voice in the crowd, was putting on a show. Fresh-pressed camo pants, mirrored shades, and a rifle so customized it looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. He strutted up to the firing line like a man stepping onto a stage. 3 quick shots rang out, all hits. The crowd cheered, cameras clicked, and Lucas drank it all in. Then his gaze settled on Ethan. "Hey, Buckingham, you forget your musket?" Laughter rippled through the group. Someone called out, "Bet he hasn't fired a live round since the Queen's birthday." Still, Ethan didn't speak, didn't even smile. He just nodded politely toward a young shooter who was adjusting his prone stance incorrectly. Lucas pressed on, louder now, needing a reaction. "You want a turn, Grandpa? I'll even let you borrow my real gun." The teasing was biting, but something in the air had shifted. A few older veterans were no longer laughing. They saw the way Ethan stood, not stiff, but rooted, balanced, like a man who'd learned stillness the hard way. Then the challenge came. One shot, same distance, same target. Lucas smirked, confident this would be the highlight of his day. Ethan finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "I'm not here to compete," he said. But he stepped forward anyway. And just like that, the show was over. The reckoning had begun. The wind shifted just slightly, carrying the scent of sun-baked gravel and spent powder across the range. But in that moment, all anyone noticed was Ethan Granger, stepping calmly toward the firing line. He moved like a man with no weight to prove, only memories to carry. The same voices that had jeered minutes earlier now whispered, unsure whether to keep mocking or to start wondering. Ethan paused by the gear table. Dozens of sleek, modern rifles lay gleaming under the sun. Carbon fiber stocks, digital rangefinders, scopes that could read license plates at 1,000 yards. But he ignored them all. Instead, he reached for a weapon no one had touched all day. A bolt-action M1000 903 Springfield with worn wood, dulled iron sights, and a sling that had seen more years than half the crowd. Lucas scoffed. "That thing belongs in a museum." Ethan didn't reply. He checked the chamber with a flick that was too smooth, too fast to be anything but second nature. Then he knelt, slow, steady, fluid, like a man returning to a familiar place. Not a range, a battlefield. As he settled into prone, the older veterans in the crowd started shifting forward, quietly, instinctively. They knew that movement. They'd seen it before. In the rare few who came back from war quieter than they left, carrying stories they'd never tell. The range officer, a no-nonsense former Marine named Curtis, called out, "Shooter ready?" Ethan exhaled. That was his answer. Lucas leaned toward his buddy. "No way he hits it, not with iron sights. Wind's all over the place." But others weren't so sure anymore, because Ethan's stillness didn't look nervous. It looked earned. The steel target stood 656 yards out, half concealed behind a low barrier, shifting slightly in the breeze. Lucas had clipped it earlier with a scoped rifle, just barely. Ethan didn't adjust for wind, didn't squint through gadgets or consult a ballistic app. He breathed, slow, deep, and with every breath the range got quieter. And then he fired. The sound wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a clean, crisp crack. Half a second later, the steel rang, dead center, a pure, unmistakable tone, like a bell announcing a truth that no one could argue. For a few heartbeats, no one moved, not even Lucas. Then someone whispered, "He hit center." Without a scope? 656 yards? The questions hung in the air, heavy with awe. Ethan stood slowly, brushed the gravel from his sleeves, cleared the chamber, and handed the rifle back to the range officer without fanfare. He wasn't smiling. He didn't gloat. He just turned and walked back to the bench like a man who had done exactly what he came to do, and nothing more. But the crowd wasn't the same anymore. Whispers turned into respectful silence. Even Lucas, now visibly rattled, stood frozen, his confidence shaken, his showmanship exposed. The younger shooters, those who had once laughed the loudest, now watched Ethan with something between admiration and guilt. One of them, maybe in his 20s, finally said what many were thinking. "Which? Who? Here's he." Curtis, the range officer, didn't look away from Ethan as he answered. "Is someone who's done it for real." Another voice, older, softer, added, "You don't learn that kind of shot on paper targets. That's battlefield calm." Lucas slowly approached, swallowing his pride with each step. "That was impressive," he mumbled. Ethan gave him a single nod. "I didn't do it to impress," he said quietly. "I did it because silence needs defending too." And in that moment, every camera stayed off, every mouth stayed shut, because some stories don't need to be told loud. They just need to be true. Lucas Blake had been the loudest man on that range. Now he stood in silence, staring at the still swinging steel target like it had just slapped him across the face. His grip tightened on the butt of his rifle, not from anger, but from realization. For all the time he spent chasing validation online, posing for photos, filming slow-motion shots, tweaking captions to sound humble but look heroic, he had missed something real. Ethan Granger didn't need followers, he had respect. And Lucas had never felt smaller in his life. He turned to his closest friend, muttered, "I thought he was just another old guy in a guard uniform." His friend shook his head slowly. "No, man, that's a soldier, you can't fake that." All around them, others were starting to piece it together. The way Ethan moved, the way he stayed quiet, the rifle he used, the eyes that had seen more than he would ever say. A few of the younger shooters approached the range officer, whispering, asking questions, but Officer Curtis didn't answer. He just kept watching Ethan, his expression unreadable, jaw tight with something that looked like respect, and maybe a little guilt, too. Ethan sat back down at his bench, poured the last of his coffee into the thermos cap and took a sip. Still no smile, still no celebration. But the entire mood of the range had shifted. One teenage boy finally broke the silence. "Sir, where did you learn to shoot like that?" Ethan looked at him, not dismissively but thoughtfully, like a man weighing how much truth to share. "Here and there," he said simply. Lucas stepped forward then, slower this time, his usual swagger gone, replaced with something heavier. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice lower than usual. "I didn't know." Ethan didn't make it easy. He didn't let him off the hook with a joke or a quick handshake. Instead, he looked at Lucas square in the eye. "You never asked." The words hit harder than the shot had. Lucas nodded slowly, accepting it. "Guess I'd judge the book by the uniform." Curtis finally spoke, glancing down at the logbook. "His name's going in the range record, 656 yards, iron sights, center hit." Another man nearby, gray-haired, veteran, leaned in and muttered to no one in particular, "Remind me never to underestimate quiet men again." And they all nodded. Because what changed that day wasn't just one man's reputation. It was how they looked at silence, at stillness, at humility. They realized the loudest man in the room isn't always the strongest. And sometimes the one with the old boots and the 1,000-yard stare carries more experience in his silence than 1,000 words could ever express. As Ethan packed up his rifle and slung his duffel over one shoulder, someone called out, "You coming back next weekend?" He paused, turned slightly and said with the faintest of smiles, "Depends if I'm on post." This time, the laughter wasn't at him. And as he walked across the lot, the sound of gravel beneath his boots felt almost ceremonial, not because of his uniform, but because of what he'd taught them without saying a word. Respect is earned, and sometimes the quietest people teach the loudest lessons. The next morning, the gravel still bore the imprint of Ethan's boots, as if the ground hadn't quite let him go yet. Though he hadn't said much the day before, his presence lingered, like a storm that passes without rain, but leaves everything changed. Lucas Blake found himself back at the range earlier than usual. No crowd, no cameras, just quiet. And for once, that quiet didn't make him uncomfortable. It made him thoughtful. He walked past the target that Ethan had hit and stared at it for a long time. The dent was still fresh, the steel still slightly bruised, but it wasn't the mark that mattered. It was what it meant. And that's when he made the call. Later that week, on a Saturday morning warmer than most, Ethan pulled into the gravel lot in his gray estate car. He wasn't scheduled for duty, but something had pulled him back. He stepped out to find a handful of shooters already gathered. Not the usual crowd chasing clout, but younger men, even a few teenagers, standing in a loose circle around Lucas. Lucas turned when he saw Ethan and walked over, not with swagger this time, but with purpose. "I was hoping you'd come," he said, extending a hand. We're starting something, and we could use your help." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. Lucas took a breath. "They want to learn, not just how to shoot, but how to do it right. Not just tactics, discipline, patience. The things you showed us the other day. We can watch all the videos in the world, but that moment, that shot, it taught more than any YouTube tutorial ever could." Ethan looked past Lucas at the group. Some were fidgeting, uncertain. Some stood tall, eager. All of them were watching him like a man who had something they deeply needed, but wouldn't ask for out loud. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke. "You don't teach with bullets," he said. "You teach with moments." Lucas smiled. "That's why we need you. Just once a week. Come down, share what you know. You don't have to say much." Ethan sipped from his thermos and looked up at the sky. He had retired from his active service years ago, but now, maybe there was one more mission. Not to fight, not to prove anything, but to pass something on. He nodded once. "I'll come, but not as an instructor," he said, "as a reminder." Lucas looked confused. "A reminder?" Ethan's gaze drifted to the range. That stillness has to come from somewhere. They need to know what came before them and why it matters. Lucas's voice softened. "They will. If you're here, they will." The following weeks became something no one expected. Saturday mornings turned into quiet gatherings. No fanfare, no competitions, just focus. Ethan never lectured. He simply observed, corrected a grip here, adjusted a shoulder there, and when he spoke, It was never more than a sentence, but each one carried weight. You breathe before the shot, not after. Don't aim to impress, aim to understand. Respect the silence. It's where your mind speaks. One young man who'd once struggled to group his shots finally hit center 3 times in a row. He turned to Ethan, eyes wide, filled with disbelief. "I didn't think I had it in me." Ethan just nodded. "You always did, you just needed less noise." And in that moment something shifted, not just in the shooter but in everyone watching. They weren't just learning to shoot. They were learning to listen. By the 3rd week something had changed, not just on the range but in the people who came there. It wasn't loud, growth rarely is, but it showed. The younger shooters, once obsessed with gadgets, gear, and Instagram tactics, were arriving earlier, talking less, listening more. Their rifles were still polished, their scopes still sharp, but now their focus had shifted from flash to form. And standing in the middle of it all was Lucas Blake. Gone was the loudmouth showman with the polished boots and rehearsed swagger. In his place was a man relearning the basics from a master who never called himself one. Ethan Granger didn't give speeches. He never talked about medals or missions, but every movement he made was a lesson. Every pause, every correction, every moment of silence was a classroom without walls. Lucas watched him closely now. How Ethan's footwork was always deliberate, how his shoulders relaxed just before every shot, how he watched wind flags the way a sailor watches sails. But most of all, Lucas noticed how Ethan never rushed anyone. One afternoon, a teenager named Caleb was struggling with breathing control. His shots were erratic, scattered across the board. Frustrated, he lowered his rifle and muttered, "I'm just not built for this." Ethan stepped beside him without a word. He knelt slowly, picked up a small stone, and placed it in Caleb's hand. "Try again," he said. Confused, Caleb returned to prone. He breathed, squeezed the trigger, and center hit. "How?" he asked. Ethan pointed to the stone. "You were thinking about your hand, not your head. It made you focus." That single moment stayed with Calais and with Lucas, who witnessed it from a few yards away. That night, Lucas sat alone on a bench near the edge of the range, replaying everything in his mind. For the first time, he realized just how little he actually knew. Not about shooting, about presence, about humility, about leadership. And that's when it clicked. Ethan hadn't come back to teach them how to shoot. He'd come back to remind them why they shoot. The following Saturday, Lucas brought something different, a notebook. Instead of talking, he wrote. Observations, phrases, details Ethan mentioned in passing, movements too subtle for a camera to capture, and slowly, Lucas began to see what had always been right in front of him. Ethan wasn't showing them how to look good with a gun. He was showing them how to carry themselves when no one was watching. The growth wasn't loud. It didn't come with trophies or certificates, but it showed in posture, in the way hands steadied before a shot, in how the younger guys now paused to help each other with grip or stance. They were becoming more than shooters. They were becoming professionals. And Lucas? Lucas was becoming something he'd never been before. A student. One morning as the group packed up, Lucas approached. "I used to think leadership was about being loud," he said. Ethan nodded, sipping his coffee. "And now?" Lucas smiled faintly. "Now I think it's about being still enough for others to follow." Ethan didn't say anything, but his eyes said enough. In that silence, Lucas found more affirmation than applause ever gave him. Because sometimes growth doesn't look like victory. Sometimes it looks like a man setting his ego down and picking up a notebook. The final Saturday of the season arrived with a crisp wind and golden morning light. Leaves rustled along the gravel path as Ethan Granger pulled into the range, same as always, unannounced, unassuming, and quietly dependable. But this time something was different. A folding chair had been placed near the firing line with a handwritten sign taped to the back, "Reserved for Mr. Granger." He said nothing when he saw it, just brushed the dust from the seat and nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a gesture too large for words. The range had grown quieter over the weeks, not in numbers, but in tone. The laughter remained, but it was gentler now. The conversations had changed from boasting to learning, and the respect? It no longer needed to be earned with bravado. Ethan watched from the chair as Caleb hit a tight group at 300 yards. The teenager turned, grinning wide, and instead of raising his arms, he simply nodded in Ethan's direction. Lucas stood beside him, offering quiet adjustments, more mentor than showman now. He didn't need to be the center of attention. He had learned to share the silence. As the morning wore on, the range officer approached Ethan with a clipboard. "End of season qualification," he said. "We're adding something this year." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "It's optional," the officer continued, "but we're calling it the Granger mark. One shot, iron sights, 600 yards, not for competition, just for character." Ethan didn't speak for a long moment. Then he asked, "And what do they get if they make it?" The officer smiled. "Perspective." Ethan chuckled quietly. "Fair enough." By noon a crowd had formed, but not like before. No one was filming, no one was posturing. They were there to witness something, not to show off. Lucas approached the bench where Ethan sat and handed him a paper cup of coffee. "We've been talking," he said, "the guys. We want to keep this going. Not just shooting, but this, what you started." Ethan looked around, the young men helping one another adjust their gear, picking up brass, shaking hands after a solid round. "I didn't start anything," he said softly. "You all did." Lucas shook his head. "No, we were just making noise. You taught us to listen." And that was the truth. What began as mockery had turned into mentorship. What started as laughter had become legacy. Before leaving, Ethan walked the length of the range, alone. He paused near the 600-yard mark and looked back toward the bench, the spot where he once fired a single shot that silenced the loudest man on the field. That moment didn't make him a legend. It simply reminded everyone what a true soldier looks like. Quiet, steady, and willing to serve, even when there's no one left to impress. As he returned to his car, a young boy, no older than 10, ran up to him, holding a notepad and a pen. "Are you like a real hero?" he asked, breathless. Ethan knelt beside him and said, "No, real heroes don't call themselves that." The boy looked confused. "Then what are you?" Ethan smiled. "I'm someone who remembers what came before, and wants you to remember it too." As he drove away, gravel crunching under his tires, the wind picked up again, but it no longer felt sharp or aimless. It felt like purpose, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that walks quietly, leaves deep footprints, and lets the silence speak for itself. What would you have done in Ethan Granger's boots? Imagine it. You walk into a room full of noise and ego. People whisper, laugh, and assume you're irrelevant because of your age, your silence, or the uniform you wear. No one knows who you are. No one cares to ask. Do you fight back? Do you raise your voice? Do you try to prove something? Or do you wait, knowing that sometimes one quiet moment speaks louder than 1,000 loud ones? If it were me, standing on that range, mocked by younger men who didn't know better, I'd like to think I'd handle it like Ethan did, with grace, with calm, with purpose. Because Ethan didn't fire that shot to win applause. He didn't respond to insults with ego. He responded with skill, forged over years of service, carried through decades of discipline. He reminded us that character isn't shown when everyone's clapping. It's revealed when no one is watching. So what's the real lesson here? It's simple but powerful. Silence is not weakness. Age is not irrelevance, and respect must be earned, but sometimes it has to be taught. In today's world, where so many rush to be heard, there's something profoundly moving about someone who waits, someone who lets their actions do the talking. And maybe that's what we need more of. More men like Ethan. More people who serve quietly. More reminders that legacy isn't something you wear on your chest, it's something you carry in how you treat others. So now it's your turn. Ask yourself honestly, have you ever judged someone too quickly by their age, their uniform, or their silence? Have you ever been underestimated and chose not to argue but to rise? If Ethan's story resonated with you, even just a little, help us share it. Hit that like button if this reminded you of someone you respect. Leave a comment telling us what you would have done in Ethan's place, or how you've learned to respond to judgment with patience. And please, subscribe to Guard Royals. We're building a community that honors stories like this, real, respectful, and deeply human. Every subscriber gets us closer to our goal of 1,000, and every view gives us the fuel to keep telling stories that matter. If you had to rate Ethan's story on a scale from 1 to 10, how powerful was it to you? Drop your score below. And remember, in a world full of noise, sometimes the quietest one in the room is the one you should be listening to.